She was small for her age, and the coat she wore was borrowed and a little too big for her thin shoulders as she stood near the entrance of the grand hall where people in fine clothes moved with confidence and ease. She kept her hands close to her body not because of the cold, but because she had learned that taking up less space made it easier to be ignored, and being ignored was often safer. The event had not been meant for her, and she knew that clearly. It was a formal gathering organized by a large company to celebrate a business milestone, and the guests included executives, investors, and influential figures who were used to attention and comfort. The hall itself was bright and elegant with polished floors, tall walls, and a piano placed near the center as a symbol of culture and refinement. She had come with her mother, who worked as a cleaner, and had been asked to help that evening. Her mother had no choice but to bring her along because there was no one else to watch her. The girl had been told to sit quietly in a corner and wait until the work was done. She nodded and did as she was told, just as she always did. The piano drew her attention immediately, not because it was grand or expensive, but because it was a piano, and music had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. At home, there was no piano, only a small keyboard with missing sounds. But she played it every day, pressing the keys carefully, listening closely, and imagining the music filling a much larger space. As guests arrived, laughter and conversation filled the hall. She watched from a distance, fascinated by the world unfolding in front of her. People spoke freely and confidently as if nothing could disturb their place there. She felt invisible among them, and that invisibility felt familiar. At some point, a man in a sharp suit with an easy smile noticed her standing near the piano. He was one of the leaders of the company, known for his confidence and humor. He enjoyed being the center of attention and often used jokes to engage the crowd. When he saw the girl, he laughed lightly and made a playful remark about her playing the piano and being adopted if she could do it. The people around him laughed as well, not unkindly, but without thought. They saw it as harmless humor, a moment to lighten the atmosphere. The girl did not fully understand the words, but she felt the attention shift toward her, and her face grew warm. Her mother noticed and quickly stepped forward, apologizing and explaining that the girl was just waiting. The man waved it off, smiling, and assured everyone it was nothing. He had not meant harm, and he quickly turned the focus back to the event. Yet the words lingered in the air, and something inside the girl stirred, not anger or shame, but a quiet resolve she had felt before when music was involved. She looked at the piano again, and then at her mother. Her mother saw the look and hesitated, knowing how much music meant to her daughter, but also knowing how dangerous it could be to draw attention in a place like this. She shook her head, gently signaling no. The girl looked down and waited, as she had been taught, yet inside her chest her heart beat faster. The piano was right there, and the idea of playing it filled her with both longing and calm. She did not want to prove anything or earn anything, she only wanted to play. As the event continued, someone suggested music to fill the space. A guest mentioned the piano and joked about letting the girl try, since the idea had already been raised. The suggestion was meant as amusement, not expectation. The man laughed again and nodded, curious to see what would happen. Her mother looked torn, but finally agreed, knowing her daughter would not forgive herself if she did not try. The girl walked slowly toward the piano, feeling every eye on her. She climbed onto the bench, her feet not quite reaching the floor, and placed her hands on the keys. In that moment, the noise of the room faded for her. She remembered the small keyboard at home and the hours spent listening and practicing alone. She remembered how music made sense when words did not. She took a breath and began to play. Part 1 of this story begins at the edge of misunderstanding and chance. It begins with a joke that carried no weight to those who spoke it, and with a child who carried far more than anyone realized. What happens next would not be about wealth or power, but about sound and sincerity, and a truth that had been waiting quietly to be heard. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As her fingers touched the keys, the room did not fall silent at once, because no one expected anything meaningful to happen. Conversation continued softly, glasses clinked, and a few people smiled indulgently, as if watching a harmless scene. Yet the girl did not notice any of it, because the piano beneath her hands felt solid and real and familiar in a way nothing else in that hall. She began with a simple melody, one she had played many times at home on her small keyboard. It was not chosen to impress, but to ground herself. The sound that came from the piano was fuller and warmer than she was used to, and it surprised her for a moment. Then she adjusted her touch naturally, as if she had always known how to meet such an instrument. A few nearby guests turned their heads, not because the music was loud, but because it was clear there was intention in the way the notes connected, and a calm confidence that did not fit the picture they had formed of the small girl in borrowed clothes. The casual laughter faded, and people began to listen. Her mother stood frozen at the edge of the room, torn between fear and pride. She had seen her daughter play many times in their small apartment, but never like this, never in a place where the sound could travel and be heard fully. She wanted to pull her away and protect her from judgment, yet she sensed that stopping her now would do more harm than good. The man who had joked earlier stopped smiling. His expression shifted slowly from amusement to curiosity, He leaned slightly forward, listening more closely. His world was built on quick assessments and confident decisions, yet this moment did not fit neatly into those habits. The girl continued playing, moving from the simple melody into something more complex. Her hands moved with care, not rushing, and not hesitating. Each note seemed to know where it belonged. She was not copying a performance. She was expressing something internal, something shaped by hours of quiet practice and listening. As the music filled the hall, conversations stopped completely. People who had not noticed her before now faced the piano fully. Some stood still, others moved closer. The atmosphere changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. It became focused and attentive. The girl did not look up. She did not seek approval or reaction. Her eyes followed her hands, and her posture remained relaxed. She played as she always did when she was alone, letting the music unfold naturally. The piano responded beautifully, and the sound echoed through the tall space, reaching corners that had been filled with chatter moments before. Now there was only music and listening. The CEO felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. It was not discomfort, but recognition. He had attended many events with polished performances and trained musicians. Yet this felt different. It felt honest and unguarded, and it stirred something he had not expected to feel. The girl reached a section that required greater control, and she handled it with ease. Her small fingers adjusted pressure, instinctively shaping tone with surprising maturity. The music carried emotion without exaggeration and restraint without coldness. People exchanged glances, not smiling now, but thoughtful. Some felt moved without knowing why. Others felt a sense of surprise that challenged assumptions they rarely questioned. Her mother wiped her eyes quietly, hoping no one noticed. She realized that her daughter had been carrying this gift quietly, waiting for a moment like this without ever asking for it. The CEO straightened slowly, his earlier words returning to him with new weight. They had been spoken lightly, without intent, yet now they echoed differently. He understood that he had underestimated not only the child, but the depth that could exist unseen. As the girl approached the final section of what she was playing, the music softened. She allowed space between phrases, letting sound linger naturally. The hall felt suspended, held together by attention. When the last note faded, no one spoke immediately. The silence was full and respectful. The girl lifted her hands gently from the keys and sat still for a moment, then turned slightly, as if waking from a private world. Part 2 of this story unfolds in that shared silence where laughter gives way to listening, and where a joke begins to reveal its unintended consequences. What had started as amusement was now something else entirely, and the people in the room felt it, even if they could not yet name it. After the silence settled, the girl slowly slid off the bench and stood beside the piano, her hands resting at her sides. She did not bow or smile, because she had never learned those gestures. She simply looked toward her mother. Searching for reassurance, her mother stepped forward at once and placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch gentle and protective. The room remained quiet, but the feeling inside it had changed. People were no longer watching a child out of curiosity. They were looking at her with attention that carried respect and uncertainty. Some faces showed emotion, others showed reflection, and a few showed something closer to shame. The CEO took a step forward, then stopped. He was used to commanding rooms with ease, but now he felt unsure of the right words. His joke replayed in his mind, and each time it sounded less harmless. He realized that he had spoken from a place of comfort, without thinking about how words could land on someone who lived very differently. He cleared his throat and spoke softly, thanking the girl for playing. His voice carried sincerity rather than humor. The sound of it seemed to release the tension in the room, and people began to breathe again. A few guests offered gentle applause, not loud or celebratory, but honest. The girl nodded slightly, still holding close to her mother. She did not understand the shift fully, but she felt it. She sensed that something important had happened, even if she could not explain it. Guests began to speak quietly among themselves, sharing reactions and questions. Some wondered where she had learned to play, others questioned how such ability could exist unnoticed. Their conversations were no longer about business or status, they were about possibility. The CEO approached the mother next and asked about the girl, not as a joke this time, but with genuine interest. The mother answered, carefully explaining their life in simple terms. She spoke of the small apartment, the keyboard, and the hours her daughter spent playing. She did not exaggerate or ask for sympathy, she only spoke truth. Listening to her, the CEO felt a weight settle in his chest. He understood that opportunity often arrived unevenly, and that talent did not announce itself with credentials. He saw clearly that his position had protected him from seeing such realities. The girl stood quietly during the conversation, watching the piano as if it were calling her back. She felt calm now, grounded by the familiar experience of playing. She did not feel proud or afraid, only present. As the event continued, people treated her differently, making space for her. Rather than stepping around her, she was offered a chair and a glass of water. Someone spoke kindly to her, asking about the music. She answered shyly but honestly. The CEO watched her from across the room, thinking about responsibility, and chance he knew that what had happened could not be ignored. Or undone, he also knew that the next choice mattered more than the joke that had started it. Part 3 of this story is about recognition without spectacle. It is about a moment when power pauses to listen, and when a child is seen not as entertainment, but as a person with depth. The room would return to its routines soon, but something lasting had begun to form quietly in the shared awareness of those who had listened. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. In the days that followed the event, the memory of the music stayed with many of those who had been present, and especially with the man who had made the joke. He returned to his work, but found his thoughts drifting back to the image of the small girl at the piano, and the calm focus on her face. He had built his life on speed and confidence, yet that moment had slowed him in a way nothing else had. He asked his assistant to find information about the girl and her mother, not in a dramatic or public way, but quietly and respectfully. What he learned unsettled him. The family lived simply. The mother worked long hours doing cleaning jobs, and the girl attended a local school with limited resources. There were no music teachers, no lessons, no formal training, only a small keyboard and a child who listened closely. The man felt something shift inside him, not guilt alone, but responsibility. He understood that wealth and power created distance, and that distance made it easy to overlook quiet realities. He also understood that offering help without care could turn kindness into control, and he did not want that. He asked to meet the mother privately in a neutral setting away from the company and the attention. She arrived nervous and cautious, expecting formality or judgment. Instead, she found a man who spoke plainly and listened carefully. He asked about her daughter, interests, habits, and dreams. He did not interrupt or offer solutions immediately. The girl sat beside her mother during the meeting, holding a small notebook. She listened more than she spoke. Her eyes moved around the room, noticing sounds and light. The piano was not there, but music still lived in her posture and presence. The man asked the girl what she liked about playing. She thought for a moment, then said that it made her feel steady and clear. The simplicity of the answer stayed with him. He realized that her relationship with music was not about ambition but balance. He explained that his earlier words had been meant as humor, but that he now understood how careless they had been. He apologized without excuse. The mother accepted, quietly appreciating the honesty. The girl listened and nodded, not fully understanding but sensing sincerity. He then spoke about possibility, not promises. He mentioned access to proper instruments and teachers if they wished, but emphasized that any decision would be theirs, and that nothing would be forced. The mother felt cautious hope mixed with fear of change. She had learned that offers sometimes came with hidden cost. The girl looked at her mother, then back at the man, and asked if playing music would still be her choice. He answered yes without hesitation. That answer mattered more than anything else. Part 4 of the story unfolds in this careful space where intention begins to replace chance, and where power learns to move more slowly. It is not about rescue or reward. It is about listening, and about creating room for talent to grow without being shaped by ego. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it was no longer invisible. What had begun as a joke had become an opening, and how that opening would be handled would define everything that followed. The weeks that followed moved slowly and carefully, as if everyone involved understood that rushing could damage something fragile. The mother considered the offer in quiet moments after work while preparing simple meals, and watching her daughter play on the old keyboard. The girl continued her routines, attending school, helping at home, and playing music each evening. As she always had, nothing about her inner world had changed, yet the world around her was beginning to widen. The man kept his distance during this time, choosing not to push or announce anything publicly. He arranged for a trusted contact who worked with arts education to speak with the mother and explain possibilities in plain language. There were no promises of fame or future, only access to lessons and instrument, and a space where the girl could learn without pressure. The emphasis remained on choice and care. The mother felt fear because change always carried risk, yet she also felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, which was hope grounded in respect. Rather than charity, she spoke openly with her daughter, explaining that learning music more deeply could bring joy, but also discipline and expectation. She wanted to be sure that the girl understood both. The girl listened quietly, then said that she wanted to learn because music helped her understand herself. That answer settled the decision, not because it was impressive, but because it was honest. The mother agreed to move forward step by step. The first piano lesson took place in a small studio that smelled of wood and paper. The teacher was an older woman with calm eyes and gentle hands. She did not speak much at first. She listened as the girl played simple pieces, then asked her to repeat them slowly. The teacher noticed immediately that the child heard music internally rather than relying on habit. Instead of correcting, she asked the girl to explain what she felt when she played. This question surprised the girl, but she answered as best she could, describing shapes, movement, and emotion. The teacher nodded, recognizing a rare way of understanding. She decided then that her role would be to guide rather than mold. The girl adapted quickly, not because she was taught, but because she absorbed knowledge naturally. She listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, and practiced with focus. She did not rush ahead or show off. She remained grounded in curiosity. At home, the mother noticed changes that were subtle. The girl spoke a little more confidently and held herself with quiet assurance, yet she remained the same child, still careful, still kind, still aware of others' needs. Music had not altered her nature, only supported it. The man followed progress through updates, but avoided direct involvement. He believed that true support required restraint. He also reflected on his own life and the many times he had mistaken confidence for depth. This experience had begun to reshape how he viewed leadership and influence. Part 5 of the story is about growth without spectacle. It is about trust built slowly and choices made with care. The girl continued forward not as a symbol or a project, but as herself, carrying music with the same sincerity. She always had. The path was opening, yet it remained hers to walk at her own pace. As the months passed, the rhythm of her life settled into a gentle balance between learning and living. She attended her lessons regularly, traveling with her mother by bus across the city. The journey itself became part of her routine, a quiet time where she watched streets pass and listened to sounds around her. Everything felt new yet familiar at the same time. Her teacher continued to guide her with patience, focusing not on speed or difficulty, but on listening. The lessons were conversations as much as instruction. They spoke about tone, about how a note could feel heavy or light, about how silence mattered as much as sound. The girl absorbed these ideas naturally because they matched what she had already felt inside. Slowly, more complex pieces entered her practice, not as challenges to conquer, but as stories to understand. She took her time exploring them, sometimes playing only a few lines for an entire lesson. The teacher encouraged this depth, reminding her that music was not a race. At school, her classmates noticed changes, though they could not name them. She seemed more grounded, less anxious. She still wore simple clothes and kept to herself, but there was a calm confidence in how she spoke and moved. Music had given her a place where she felt complete, and that sense carried into other parts of her life. The mother watched all of this with a mix of pride and caution. She remained protective, ensuring that her daughter rested, played, and remained a child. She refused offers that felt rushed or public. She trusted her instincts, knowing how easily intention could be misunderstood. The man who had first joked continued to observe from a distance. He attended a small recital where the girl played alongside other students. He sat quietly at the back, listening not as a CEO, but as a person. He noticed that her playing was not flashy but sincere, and that people responded with stillness rather than applause. That moment confirmed his choice to step back. He realized that true support meant allowing others to grow without interference. His role had shifted from decision maker to witness, and that shift changed him deeply. Part 6 of the story is about steady unfolding. There are no dramatic turns, only consistent care and attention. The girl continued to grow, not into an image created by others, but into herself. Music remained her guide, teaching her patience, presence, and trust. What lay ahead was still uncertain, but it was no longer fragile. It was rooted in understanding and supported by respect, and that foundation would carry her through whatever came next. As she grew older, the world around her began to notice her not as a curiosity or a story, but as a musician with a voice that carried meaning. Her teacher encouraged her to listen widely and to experience music beyond the piano, so she attended small concerts, rehearsals, and community events where music lived in many forms. She listened carefully, absorbing not just sound but intention and presence. Her playing continued to deepen, not through ambition, but through understanding. She learned how emotion could be shaped without being forced, and how discipline could exist without pressure. These lessons extended beyond music into how she spoke, how she listened to others, and how she carried herself in unfamiliar spaces. Opportunities appeared gradually. Invitations came to perform in modest settings, libraries, schools, and small halls. She accepted some and declined others, always guided by whether the space felt respectful and aligned. She never performed to impress, she played to communicate, and people felt that difference even if they could not explain it. Her mother remained her anchor, attending every performance, quietly sitting in the same place and leaving without drawing attention. She reminded her daughter often that music was part of life, not the measure of it. That grounding kept the girl steady as the circle around her widened. The man who had once laughed followed her journey from afar with quiet pride. He spoke rarely of his role and never claimed credit. When asked, he described the experience as a lesson in listening. He carried that lesson into his work, changing how he approached people whose voices were not loud. Part 7 of the story is about maturity. It is about learning how to carry talent with humility and how to move forward without losing oneself. The girl was no longer defined by poverty or chance. She was defined by choices made carefully and consistently. She understood now that music had given her more than skill. It had given her a way to stand in the world with clarity and calm. And as she continued forward, she carried that gift with gratitude, knowing that her story was still unfolding, shaped not by a single moment, but by a lifetime of listening. In the years that followed, her life unfolded with a quiet strength that surprised many who expected a dramatic rise or a public story. She did not become a symbol or a headline. Instead, she became a person who lived with intention. Music remained central, but it no longer stood alone. It blended naturally into her education, her relationships, and her understanding of the world. She continued her studies with care, choosing paths that allowed balance. She learned about music history, composition, and teaching, not because she sought authority, but because she wanted context. She wanted to understand where sound came from and how it shaped people across time. This knowledge deepened her respect for the art and reminded her that she was part of something larger. Her performances grew less frequent, but more meaningful. She chose spaces where listening mattered and where connection felt real. Some audiences were small yet deeply engaged, others were larger but equally attentive. She learned that scale did not determine value, and that intimacy often carried greater truth. Her mother watched her become more independent with pride and relief. The fear that once shadowed every opportunity slowly faded, replaced by trust in her daughter's judgment. They spoke often about the past, not with bitterness, but with clarity, acknowledging how chance and kindness had intersected. They also spoke about the future, not with pressure, but with openness. The man who had once made the careless joke eventually met her again at a quiet event years later. He listened as she played, then thanked her for a lesson he carried with him still. He told her that moment had changed how he listened to people who did not demand attention. She thanked him simply, knowing that growth had moved in both directions. She never spoke publicly about adoption or rescue, because those words did not fit her truth. Her story was not about being saved. It was about being seen, and being allowed space to grow. That distinction mattered deeply to her. When young students asked her how it all began, she spoke honestly. She said it began with listening. And with patience. She said talent could exist anywhere, and that respect was the soil it needed to grow. She encouraged them to trust their inner voice even when the world laughed or looked away. Part 8 of her story is not an ending, but a continuation. It is the quiet assurance that a life shaped by care, intention, and listening can move forward without losing its center. The girl who once sat at a grand piano by chance became a woman who chose her path with clarity. Her music continued not as proof, but as presence, and through it, she lived a life grounded in dignity, connection, and quiet truth. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.